Hi, I'm Joyce Harper, and I want to welcome you to season 4 of my podcast, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? Together with expert guests and those with lived experiences, we will give you some tools to empower you to live a life of good health and happiness. Welcome to episode 2 of season 4, and my guest today is Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple, and we are talking about sifting through social media misinformation about our health. Lauren is a researcher and science communicator specializing in female physiology, exercise, and nutrition. And I absolutely love her posts on social media. So it's great to talk to her today about science and how we do research and how we should be reporting that to the public, and then also going through some specific examples that I know Lauren is very passionate about. Enjoy. Welcome, Lauren.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure, and I really can't wait to talk about social media and all the myths. And this is something very dear to both of our hearts. But let's start with your career, Lauren, to date. So tell us about your career. I know you've done lots of exciting things. And what specifically led you to want to spend time correcting the misinformation online?
Well, before I trained as a scientist, I worked as a fitness professional. So my desire to go back to school, get the master's degree, get the PhD, at the time, we really didn't have as much research in women, specifically when it came to muscle and resistance training. So my interest really stemmed from a personal enthusiasm for strength training and also a desire to optimize the results for my clients at the time. And then as I dove deeper into different types of research, because I've done the really kind of applied translational stuff, and I've also done the under the microscope, teasing muscle cells apart kind of stuff, and a lot of things in between. And so I've came to a point where I was really interested in the mechanism or the why behind the what, but always wanted to come with a practical lens, especially when speaking publicly, because it's important to distinguish between what is sort of interesting from a scientific perspective and then practically meaningful for the general public. So over my career training as a scientist and then now doing more and more science communication, it's been an interesting journey because I'm still wearing that fitness professional hat this many years later.
uh, when I was in my 20s, actually, just when I finished my PhD, I became a qualified aerobics teacher. And I just did it for fun. It was just, I was doing so much fitness anyway. I used to teach. So it's always been at the back of my heart, really, the importance of exercise. And listening to your social media feed and what you've been doing, I just really love your work so much. It's just so important because you really are crossing over the science and the fitness and women's health in general as well. And so many women listen to what's on social media and they really take it on board. But sometimes, as we're going to discuss, the information has got, but it's become misinformation. So when did you first realize that there was actually, I'm going to call it a big problem about health misinformation, especially regarding to exercise on social media?
I think the more and more time I spent on social media, the more I really started to realize it. I think that there was definitely a big wave over the pandemic of maybe people who weren't traditionally online becoming more active on social media, including those with degrees and that should be seen as qualified, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
But and the other thing is the introduction of TikTok that really happened over that time, and then I think just more and more people starting to get their news or just information in general from social media instead of those other more traditional sources like magazines or TV or even friends and family.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think the pandemic has really been the pivot of people taking a lot more information online. So I've heard so many of your posts, all of your posts, and I really love the way that you're trying to make people understand how science works. And I dabble in it, but you do it much, much better than I do. So we hear people say things like a study showed without any context. And as you are very good at explaining the differences between things like observational studies and randomized control trials and mechanistic studies. And also, we hear about the study in a mouse that's been extrapolated to, okay, we need to do this in humans. So can you tell us a sort of brief overview for how we can understand what's good science and what's not? Maybe what's the difference between these sorts of studies, which I know you've covered quite a few times.
It really depends on the question we're trying to explore. That dictates the appropriate study design. So, when we think about a mechanistic study, that is typically in an animal model because it requires so much control and sometimes really invasive techniques that we would never be ethically permitted to do in humans. And you can do really interesting things with those models because you can delete a gene or overexpress a gene and then answer questions like, if we remove this, then what happens? And that gives us mechanistic insight into sort of the regulation of systems that's going on. When we look at more of the human trials, there are observational studies, and the advantage of that is you can get these really large data sets. And then typically the goal is to look for patterns and relationships in the data. So we wouldn't look at that for that kind of analysis to say, if you do this, then that will happen. Or if you don't do this, then that will happen. What we're saying is, it seems like the people who were doing these things also ended up in with these outcomes. And so maybe there's this kind of relationship there. And that's where we get into that kind of correlation where we say it seems like there's a relationship, but it could be that we're not looking at all of the necessary variables to really conclude that. So that's why I say its purpose is to identify patterns that we can then explore in other types of more controlled research. And so then we get to the human clinical trial, and we have clinical trials that are shorter and longer in length, but essentially we're trying to, as controlled a manner as possible, really answer a question of, if we change this variable, then does that affect our outcome of interest? And so maybe it's a drug trial. That's the most popular one that people are probably familiar. You're either on the drug or you're on the placebo, and then we have an outcome of interest, and maybe that's health, a health parameter, maybe that's weight loss, and we say, okay, is this effective? Is this safe over time? And it typically goes through many stages of those trials before we say, okay, there is a causal relationship here. If we insert this or take this away, then it seems like on average we are getting that result.
Yeah, you've brought up a good word there, causation. And I've seen you talk about this as well. So we have the two important words here, correlation and causation. And correlation does not always equal causation. Can you explain what that means?
So a correlation is a relationship. And we can say a positive correlation, meaning, if as one thing goes up, so does the other. Or we can say it's a negative correlation. And essentially we're saying there's some kind of relationship where when one moves, so does the other. But we're typically in the simplest form just looking at two variables. And so when my favorite example of this is, a long time ago, there were a lot of headlines and a lot of news about coffee consumption and lung cancer. And it seemed like there was this relationship between coffee drinkers and incidence of lung cancer. And so people got really scared about, oh, does coffee have all these negative health effects? Because there's this relationship here. However, they weren't controlling for a very important variable, smoking, because people who are cigarette smokers also tended to drink more coffee. So we can identify these relationships, but it's really important that we don't jump the gun and say, oh, well, clearly drinking coffee causes lung cancer, because we might be missing one of those other key variables that does end up being causal. And so we might end up making these kind of spurious conclusions prematurely if we jump to, oh, this is a causal relationship. If you do that, then this will happen.
Yeah, and that's a great example, beautifully put. So we've, in my view, I think we need to be hesitant when we hear about mechanistic studies or observational studies, and when we think about correlation. And what we really need is, we need to look at, for me, the creme de la creme studies, but it's not always possible, obviously, are randomized controlled trials, and really finding out the cause. So is that how you feel as well? Is that what you would say to the public?
Yes, I think if we are going to think about exercise recommendations, nutritional recommendations, anything where we're really changing a lifestyle behavior, we need to rely on those human clinical trials. Because if not, we're probably making a lot of assumptions based on those other types of data that just don't really tell us that if we make this change, we can expect that outcome.
And I think the problem that we're seeing nowadays as well is that you hear these things, the public are hearing these things on social media. They're not quite correct. They've been extrapolated, and they stick in their minds. So I'm hearing from health professionals all the time about trying to wean their patient off the misinformation, and they're now sitting in front of the health professional, probably with decades of clinical experience, and the health professionals having to argue about what they heard an influencer tell them. And one great example, a dear friend of mine was giving a talk recently, and he said he's a world leader in male infertility, and he said he gets patients coming in, and some of the men are on two or three lots of supplements, some of which are now, because they're taking so much, they're actually causing damage. And he said during this lecture, he said, I can't get them off it, because they've been sucked in with the social media and the marketing, which is so clever and such a brainwash, that now these men won't come off. So people like you and me, I think we've got this real issue now with almost, I'm going to say it, brainwashing of the public through social media, misinformation around health.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the biggest issues is often that marketing pitch comes with a dig at science or traditional medicine. And the message is those people don't know, or those people don't have your best interest in mind. And here's the secret that they're actually keeping from you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's unbelievable. Now, before we go into some of our, yours and mine's biggest red flags, I'm going to call them red flags. One other bee in my bonnet is, I'm seeing people that I've seen this all of my career, where there's been a study on a particular group of people, and then people have extrapolated this to everybody. And what I'm seeing in your area, in the health and the fitness area, is studies on elite athletes, or studies on men or young men or whatever, or short term interventions. And then they've extrapolated these to say, oh, well, the average woman who exercises 4 times a week, this is going to apply to them. So this extrapolation of findings, especially from elite athletes, to the general public. So is that been a problem?
I think the biggest problem is when some of these messages are communicated, the question is never, who is this for? Because if we're going to say, all women or all people, or all older people or all sedentary people, like this is, or all elite athletes, these are really important questions to address so that people can say, is this something I should worry about, or is this something that probably someone else needs to worry about? And I don't think the issue is actually that, we're doing so much science in elite athletes. It's more that a lot of the messaging is aimed to the general public, but it's picking something that, if you don't have all the other basics in place, is completely irrelevant. It's not something that's important to focus on. And so something like uh, something about a supplement, or something about nutrient timing, how close to your workout before or after you need to eat, or cold plunging and saunas or other kind of recovery modalities. And my fear and my sense is that people are taking in this information and then starting to be concerned about all of these nuances or sort of extras that could be relevant for the high level fitness enthusiast or the elite athlete who already has their training and their diet and their sleep and their stress and all of that really dialed in, and they are looking for that extra rep or extra second because it really matters. But if we start worrying about that as individuals who aren't even regularly exercising, or are constantly switching up how we are exercising, or hopping from one diet to the next, then we're kind of building upon a cracked foundation. If we don't have all of that in place, then we really shouldn't be considering these things.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, people who are dabbling and doing bits and bobs, and I think for me the other issue is that we are all individual, and I've heard so many things that have been a blanket statement, and one of the ones you mentioned just then, which is fasting. So I'm going to head into some of our examples now, and the one that I've had a lot of arguments with people about fasting and about breakfast and about exercising fasted. I had an argument with a really good friend of mine last week who she does a lot in the public domain, and she says that the most important meal is absolutely our breakfast, and we should always eat breakfast. And I'm someone that doesn't. I don't eat breakfast, and I exercise in the morning. So, and I not often do quite high impact things. So and I'm not an elite athlete by any means, but I don't eat first because I wake up, exercise, and then I eat. So I know you've had this discussion with a certain person many times, and you did a brilliant podcast with Stacey Sims. And now let me remember, is it called The Doctors That Lift? What was
Yeah,
the
the
great,
Nadolski brothers.
yeah, the Nadolski brothers. I'll put a link in the show notes. But I really love that podcast. I was so looking forward to hearing it. So let's do that one first. Let's do this whole thing that you need to eat a certain amount of protein before you exercise. That was sort of the message that I was hearing on social media, and that is so nuanced. Obviously, can you tell us your view about exercising fasted?
Your point about individualization is something I want to highlight, because even when we look at studies, right, they typically report averages. We are often encouraged to also report those, individual values. But when we conclude at the end of the paper, we're saying on average, this resulted in, this much of a change in whatever outcome. And no study like that is ever going to tell you personally exactly how to eat or exactly how to exercise, because we actually have a lot of flexibility there, which is wonderful. It means that we have some choices and we aren't all locked into doing the exact same things. When it comes to fasting, we've gone on this bizarre roller coaster of breakfast was the most important meal of the day, to fasting could increase our lifespan. That was based on a lot of rodent studies, and got people fasting for 12, 15, then 24 hours, then doing multi-day fasts. And now we've kind of come back the other side where we said, you know what? A lot of that doesn't seem to apply to humans, all of those potential longevity benefits of fasting. So I think we have enough data at this point to say fasting looks like a potential tool if you're somebody who is trying to eat less throughout the day, because when you have a shorter, feeding window, fewer hours during which you eat, then that might help you eat less. So if you're somebody who's trying to go on a fat loss diet, that can be a tool. It's not magic. It only works because it shortens that window. With fasting or eating before exercise, that really comes down to personal preference. And we have longer term studies where people either ate beforehand or did not. And the outcomes that we care about, muscle growth or strength gain or fat loss, they're the same. So, what we conclude is overall calories and protein on a consistent basis. So, throughout the day, throughout the week, those are much more important drivers of these long term adaptations. But the key driver of the adaptations is the exercise. So we, instead of focusing on are you eating or what are you eating, how close to the workout are you eating, we need to be really drilling down, are you training in an effective way? And then are you doing that consistently? Are you progressing over time? Once we've laid that foundation, then we say, okay, consuming, sufficient calories, sufficient protein, sufficient fiber, all of that is important. And those are the conversations we need to have before we even consider the composition of the pre-workout meal or the timing of the pre or the post-workout meal. Because the reality is that's probably not going to be a factor unless you're somebody who's doing really long endurance training, for example. You really need that fuel. So if you're running a marathon, it's probably a good idea to have a
Yeah.
meal, beforehand. But for most of us who are exercising, 45 minutes or an hour in the morning, we aren't actually going through enough of that stored glycogen to even worry about it.
Yeah, yeah. And my advice to everybody is just listen to what's working for them and how they're feeling. Yeah, as you said, it is so individual. Now, while we're on food, and you've just mentioned protein. So protein, this is another one. I used to teach aerobics in the 80s. It was the saying was, you've got to go home and reload your carbs. That was always the thing. We've got to go home and eat loads of pasta. Now, 2026, we've got to go home and eat loads of protein. So we're obsessed with protein, and people are obsessed with protein bars. My son's doing a soccer scholarship in the US, and he said almost all of his team are drinking protein shakes or eating protein bars, except him. He's not. He's not. He's eating chicken and eggs and food. So, what should we believe about protein?
I think we would all agree that the RDA of zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day is a little bit too low. And so bumping that up can be useful and effective, particularly for older people. But the driver of muscle growth and muscle maintenance is the training. So if we aren't lifting weights, we aren't going to eat our way to muscle growth or sarcopenia prevention. That it's not going to work that way. What it does do is optimize the potential results that we get from our exercise, because the idea is we're stimulating the muscle with exercise, and then we're eating protein, and the protein has amino acids that can kind of turn on the switch to bring some of those muscle proteins into the muscle where we want them to stay. And that's the driver for a growth over time. But if we don't have the stimulus, then we're missing the key to unlock that muscle protein synthesis response.
Yeah, I'm going to come on to different types of exercise and things in a moment. I want to stay on nutrition. So I know you've talked about this as well. We've got creatine, we've got collagen, we've got all these sorts of things. Every month it's a new thing. Oh, you're supposed to take this, you're supposed to take that. What should we believe? What do we really know at the moment?
Well, the reality is there are many effective ways to hit your protein target because when we think about any protein source, traditionally we think about meat or dairy, but there's wheat protein, there's corn protein, and those have what differentiates one protein source from another is that amino acid makeup, and so we want enough of those essential amino acids and we want enough of the branch chain amino acids, the leucine, the isoleucine, the valine. Those are important for muscle. So we can look at the amino acid makeup of a particular protein source and say that is high quality in the context of muscle or not. And most meat sources, fish, dairy, also soy, so products like tofu, pea protein, these are all high quality in terms of that amino acid makeup. Collagen is one of the most low quality sources we have, and we know because it lacks so many of those essential amino acids. It's extremely low in leucine, and so it absolutely makes sense why it's not effective for muscle. So we can do animal or plant, but we want to skip collagen. And even when we look at the data on the effects of skin or the effects of joints. I know some people say anecdotally that they feel that it's helped with their joint pain, and that's okay. But the data overall is in a state that there's all these different collagen sources and doses being used. So even if you were to say, well, I want to take it just in case, I would have no idea what dose or source to actually recommend. So you're just sort of blindly picking something. So I would really skip collagen.
Creatine?
Creatine has been around for decades and it's one of the most studied supplements in the athletic world, I think. It's having this renaissance where now it's being targeted specifically for women. And it's really odd to see. And my pet peeve is that it's being repackaged and sold in, gummy form or in a pink bottle or marketed as toning or fat burning or cellulite reducing. Does none of those things. What creatine can do is improve performance if you are somebody who exercises. These performance effects, if they exist, they will be minimal. Most people who take creatine don't really notice a benefit. But the studies indicate that maybe it will give you, an extra rep in your set or take off an extra half second off your sprint. It's something like that in terms of performance benefits. So for us to say everyone should be on it, I think is probably overhyped. And certainly for anyone to say this is creatine for women is just false. It's just a marketing ploy. They're charging you more money, they're making it pink, and we don't need any more of that. And creatine for fat loss or cellulite reduction, there's absolutely no evidence to suggest it will help with any of that.
I just don't know how people are getting away, how companies are getting away with marketing of all of this fake marketing. So when I was younger, there was advertising standards. You couldn't say that this product would do something that it didn't actually do. And now it's absolutely rife. You've just given so many examples of of bunches of chemicals that are being marketed to people, And as you said, yeah, there's testimonials, there's, your just people's own view of saying, it's work. And placebos are very great effect. If you're convinced something's going to really, that influence has convinced you that taking this concoction is going to work. So I just don't understand how, added to the effects of social media, there can be this mismarketing, misadvertising, that especially for women, I think, but I won't speak for you, but I know for me, it's so, I get, maybe because I'm female, I get all that marketing, but it's so ridiculously over the top. And there are women spending hundreds of dollars and pounds every month on all of these chemicals that they're taking that they feel are improving their health. What do you think about this misadvertising of all this stuff?
I think it's been a issue in the fitness space forever. But women have always been a particular target because there's these, standards of beauty and thinness that everybody is trying to live up to, and it becomes so challenging that we are tempted to look for that quick fix or the promise of this dramatic transformation, even if maybe we know on some level that it's probably too good to be true. It's just really, really effective from a marketing perspective. And I think, when I look back 20, 30 years ago, it was diet pills, or it was even exercise classes that were kind of promising to transform your body. And now we're in a wave where it's more and more supplements, definitely, and even peptides or microdosing GLP-1s, or there's so many more. And it's hard to imagine where we go next when everything is already in this kind of heightened state, and people are willing to spend more and more and more money, and in some cases inject themselves with sort of mystery serums.
We see Brian Johnson do that all the time, injecting himself with all sorts of things. I just, yeah, the whole longevity field to me. We're going to come back to longevity in a minute. Let's talk about women now, and specific exercises for women. So I think everyone would agree, especially we're this increased risk of osteoporosis. And I did a great podcast just before Christmas with Professor Neil Gittos, who's the chair of the Royal Osteoporosis Society. So he told us all about the importance of weight training. So Lauren, weight training, especially for women, what's the most important thing, and what are some misconceptions that you might have seen online? Especially, I think we do need to bring in the good old weighted vest.
It's really important because, as I said, it's the most effective way to build and maintain muscle as we age. And muscle is really important for just our activities of daily living and maintaining day-to-day physical function. And it's also effective for maintaining bone density and preventing falls. And so if we can get all of those benefits from one form of exercise, we should really take advantage of that. It needs to be challenging. And that's where we sometimes miss the boat with the Pilates classes or the bar classes. I think where we're not really challenging the muscle in the most effective way that we could be. So, not to say that it needs to be really, really heavy sets of 5, but whether you're doing a set of 5 or a set of 10 or a set of 15, the weight that we're using needs to be challenging enough that when we finish that set, you want to think, maybe I could do 1 or 2 more, but not 10 more. If you could do 10 more, then it's too light. And the challenging weight will vary depending on the exercise that you're doing. So bigger muscle groups or compound exercises, though, we'll be able to use heavier loads for those. And then those smaller muscle groups or those single joint exercises, then maybe we'll pick a lighter load. So we can't do it all with the same and expect it to be challenging. And then the other key is we want to progress over time, because what's difficult this month might no longer be difficult a couple months from now. So can we do more reps with the same weight, or can we move up to a higher load?
Yeah, I'm really trying this year. I do body pump, so I do body pump normally 3 times a week, and I've I've promised my teacher. I already have. I've been upping my weights after many years of just poodling along. But the weighted vest. So I know you've written a lot about this. So often marketed as a shortcut to bone density, fat loss, cardiovascular fitness, goodness knows what. What do we really know? Should we all go and buy a weighted vest, Lauren?
The problem with the messaging around the weighted vest is it's almost always telling women to go for walks wearing the weighted vest. And we have no data showing efficacy of walking with a weighted vest on muscle or bone or fat loss. So we can wear the weighted vest as resistance for doing squats or lunges, maybe. I don't know how many people are using it in that way, because I really only see people going for a walk. But the reason why it's not an effective choice for muscle or for bone is we aren't stimulating the muscle and the bone in the appropriate way. It's not enough of a challenge to go for a walk, regardless of how heavy a vest we're using. So yes, it can be an option if maybe you have some grip strength issues, and you don't have access to machines, and so the weighted vest is one of the ways that you can target your lower body. But the other issue is, if you're using it for that, we're not able to target the upper body very effectively. So while it might be okay for squats and lunges, we won't be able to use it for a lot of the upper body exercises. And the other issue is, remember that progression over time element that I mentioned. So, unlike more traditional strength training, where it's fairly easy to grab a heavier weight, now we're saying, oh, you'll have to order a heavier vest, every month or something. Like, so I would. My major issue with the weighted vest is not that people are being more active. I think it's great if people are going to be more active, but they're purchasing them and using them on walks under the false impression that it will be beneficial for muscle and bone.
I'm not going to buy one. Another one that I was really curious when I first heard this: grip strength. So being presented as a predictor of how long you're going to live. Now, as a woman with a bit of arthritis in my fingers and my wrists, I am pretty fit, but I'm not. I'm pretty rubbish. My grip strength is not good. So I've heard many women say, and I've seen gadgets that are going to improve your grip strength. So you almost with, I'm going to be devil's advocate, don't do any other exercise. Just sit there doing this grip strength, and you'll live longer, which is obviously rubbish. So is grip strength a predictor of our longevity?
So, this is an example of a relationship from one of those observational studies that we talked about before, meaning we look at large cohorts of grip strength measures. And grip strength is something that is really easy to measure in any setting, because it's just a little portable handheld machine and you squeeze it. So you can do it if you're a patient in the hospital, you can do it in a gym setting, you can do it whether you are an elite athlete or you've literally never exercised in your life, because there's no learning curve, right? If we went out and we said, oh, we're going to try to test everybody's leg press strength. Well, if you're in the hospital, that's probably not very realistic. Or if you're someone who's never done a leg press before, then there's that kind of learning curve that we would want to implement before we actually tested your maximal leg press strength. So that's why grip strength is this sort of go-to because it's easy to measure, and it's easy to measure in people who are really sick. And so now we have a wealth of data in that those clinical settings as well as in healthier people, and you can look at the patterns and say, okay, there's a relationship between grip strength and longevity or mortality, or inverse relationship rather. What it tells us is that stronger people are in better health because grip strength is a proxy for overall strength. And people who are maintaining their muscle mass and strength with age are people who are more physically active. When we are in a setting like bed rest or long-term hospital stay, one of the biggest issues is the side effect of losing a lot of muscle. And so that is a problem. We really do want to focus on maintaining overall muscle mass and strength. But the key here is not about focusing on grip strength. We want all of the muscle, not just the muscles of our forearms and our hands. So if I can give it, a message to the general public, it shouldn't be about measuring or tracking or training grip strength. It should be focusing on full body challenging resistance training so that we can maximize muscle maintenance.
Brilliant, brilliant. So talking about that overall, let's go into that a little bit more. So there's so much conflicting advice about what women should do, and women should train differently to men or the same as men. What would your advice be for women of any age who want to maintain their health and through exercise? What sort of exercise should they be doing?
The most important piece of advice is find something that you will do regularly, because I can give you this optimal training program, and if you won't do it, it's terrible advice. So we go back to that, individualization is important. Overall physical activity, whether that's hiking or biking or cutting the grass or shoveling the snow, all of that really does contribute because you are doing activity regularly. It's challenging. And when we stop moving, that's when we really run into these problems. So overall physical activity is really important. But if you can do some regular exercise with resistance, with weights of any kind, by the way. So the muscle doesn't know the difference, whether you're using machines or you're using barbells or you're using dumbbells or cables. It's all good. It's all resistance. And if you want to do that at home or in a gym setting or with a trainer or in group fitness, all of that is good. We just want to remember that it should be challenging, and we want to target the whole body, and we want to try to progress over time. So really, it's not that complicated, and we have a lot of options in terms of the resistance that we choose, the exercises that we choose. There's no kind of one size fits all or must do exercise for anybody, regardless of our sex or age.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've just finished my latest book about health and happiness over 50, and I've got a whole chapter on exercise. And I've said what you said. You've just got to do what's sustainable and what makes you happy. And I find for me, some of the situations I'm in, discussions in about exercise, sometimes there's some people that really have embraced exercise and we're loving it, and for want of a better word, we find it sexy. I find it a really great thing to do. It's out there and it's fun, but there is definitely still this view overall that exercise is terrible and it's an ordeal. We have one famous chat show in the UK with lots of women on. I won't mention them, but one of the presenters, actually one of my friends who's a menopause expert, was on, and while they were introducing her, one of the presenters said something like, "Oh, I hope she doesn't say that we've all got to exercise." Oh, she's like, "Oh, exercise," and there's this thing that so many people, especially in the menopause area, have been saying that They're just trying to get the patients to walk. There are women that get to perimenopause and they're not doing anything. I mean, anything at all. So what can we? I mean, obviously that's something sustainable, but I'm sure you feel don't. I feel I love my exercise. It makes me happy. It makes it. I laugh. It's social. I just love it. I look forward to going to it every day. It's not a chore. How can we reset women's brain, especially women, but men as well? How can we reset that message about exercise for those who are not really doing it?
Well, I think we could all probably find something that we really hate. If you told me I had to go for runs all the time, I would hate it. So, and I think that that's one of the traps people fall into is they think, oh, all right, I better start exercising, and they do something that they already know they aren't going to like. It's going to be a
Mm.
whole ordeal, but they think, well, running is good for me, and so I need to start running. And we need to be a bit more open-minded and a bit bigger picture thinking, I think, when it comes to what we choose, because there are so many elements that go into it and that will contribute to your enjoyment and also your adherence over time. And so having a social component can be a big factor, or maybe you're working out with a friend, or maybe you're in a group setting, and there's also that kind of element of social support that can be good. There's also just doing something that is pain free and not jumping in too quickly, not going too hard too soon, so that you kind of take two steps forward and one step back. And the reason that I love lifting weights, and I think it's extremely empowering for everyone, but especially for women, is because you actually see changes in your body composition or in your ability to perform an exercise or your range of motion or how much you can lift. And that element of progression and over time makes you feel successful, and it sort of becomes gamified and trying to beat your former self, and that can be really motivating in a way that just saying, okay, clock in, clock out for my exercise and not really thinking about what you're doing or if you're improving. That's often where we start to kind of fall off. There needs to be that element that keeps us going back.
Yeah, just sustainable is so important. I think some of the problems do actually come from school. In school, there's lots of women I know who in their 50s now who are doing amazing things and doing marathons, but they said at school they weren't classed as the sporty kid. They were never chosen for teams. They and for various reasons they just didn't work, and the school sports environment really put them off. I hope it's changed. I hope it's I've only got boys, so I don't know what it's like for girls to go through that, but at school in modern times. Um but I think whatever you experience, it may be some of the women I interviewed, they were doing surfing, they were doing climbing, some had climbed mountains, some were just doing indoor climbing, some were doing skipping rope, dancing, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Obviously, we need to lift the weights as well. But I mean, I'll admit, I've written this in my book. I hate Pilates. I try it every now and then. I say no, I still hate it.
I think the other thing that's important to recognize is we get a huge benefit from only doing exercise maybe twice a week, like 2 30-minute workouts per week. The benefits are extremely powerful. So it's not like we have to be going to the gym every single day for an hour. And so sometimes, even just by setting a goal that feels pretty sustainable, feels pretty achievable, like 2 30-minute workouts per week. And then once we've built that habit, then maybe we do a little bit more. But I think people do this often with kind of New Year's resolutions, you just go too big. try to do too many things, and you kind of set yourself up for failure because you've overcommitted in a way that you won't end up enjoying, because you're just trying to do all the things, trying to change too much at once, instead of saying, okay, what one habit can I really hone in on and adopt and maintain? And then we add the next habit.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. Just small steps. And you're so right. That New Year's resolution, I've seen it every year. I'm seeing it now. All of my exercise classes are totally full. And give it a couple of, and I've seen people stay. I normally do two classes in a row, and I've seen so many brand new people walk in. They do two classes. They're there for 2 or 3 weeks. I never see them again.
Yeah.
They've burnt it out really. And you talked about benefits. So I think what's really important is, yes, exercise can make us look better. But for me, especially at my age, the most important benefits are the health benefits and the preventative medicine. You said earlier about the risk of falling, all those sorts of things. But we know that exercise is at the top of the list of the reduction of many chronic health conditions. It's just so important and becomes even more important as we're aging. But I obviously think, like Neil on the osteoporosis podcast said, we're laying down all of our bone strength before the age of 25. So we've got to ingrain this in young people. I don't think I've ever heard. I said to my sons, "Has anyone ever told you that?" And they went, "No." If I think
Yeah.
that's such a message for women, young women. Okay, the reason to get exercising now is because your long term health is seriously going to be improved. So I think we don't get enough. When you see a lot of influencers about exercise, it's all like showing all their muscles. I know a few people who just show a picture of themselves every single day. And I'm like, it's not about what I'm not exercising to change my look. I'm changing it for my health.
I think one of the major problems with fitness industry information aimed specifically at women is that historically 90% of it has been about weight loss.
Yeah.
And so instead of really focusing on, well, why is muscle important? Because we can see it, sure, but because of our ability to age independently, that's when we'll look back and really care about the fact that we still have enough muscle to continue to walk and stand and sit and not need assistance. And so when we think about weight loss focused exercise recommendations, they're almost always disappointing, because if you're not changing your diet and you're just starting an exercise program and expecting all these dramatic weight loss results, you'll probably be disappointed. The results won't be as dramatic as you anticipated, because nutrition is really the driver of weight loss. The other thing is, when we target our goal just as scale weight, we miss all of those other benefits, the psychological benefits, the social benefits, the overall health benefits. And we often end up deciding that the thing we're doing isn't working purely because the only metric that we care about is scale weight. So I think that can be really damaging and really discouraging if we are only focusing on exercise as a weight loss tool.
Yeah. Yeah. The mental health benefits for me through exercising are extraordinary. It honestly, it makes me feel so good. Now, Lauren, are there any other red flags that really annoy you? I know you do so many posts, and everyone needs to follow you and listen to your wise words. Any others that we haven't discussed yet that really bug you?
Uh, this vibration plate training is coming back. And which it's so interesting, right? Because we talked about the weighted vests, and that certainly reminds me of the ankle weights and the wrist weights. And so now we have these vibration plates that people are using at home, and claims about fat loss and lymphatic drainage and muscle growth and bone. And I find this one pretty concerning, because you're just standing on a vibration plate and hoping that it will have these benefits. And what they're really doing in the marketing is leaning on studies where people were on 55 days of bed rest, and or returning from space, and saying, is there something that we can do, anything that we can do to try to help these people recover, and by stimulating the muscle or the bone with this vibration, could that do anything? And now it's been repackaged and marketed as an alternative to strength training, which it is not.
Oh, oh dear. I haven't seen that one yet, but the visions of the adverts for when I was young of women standing with these big belts around their bottoms and everything wobbling. It's like, oh, and no doubt there'll be something else soon. There'll be another crazy fad soon, for sure. Is there any advice you'd give anyone if they're listening to TikTok or Instagram about how they can sift out, besides following you and following me, any other way they can sift out reality from myths?
If there were a secret diet, exercise program, supplement, everybody would be talking about it. It would be everywhere. And it wouldn't be a secret. And one of the biggest examples of that is the GLP-1 medication when it was approved for weight loss. Everybody was talking about it. It was available everywhere. It wasn't this hidden secret. And there were clinical trials that went on for years before it was ever kind of introduced to the market. So when you think about somebody coming in and saying, like, oh, this new miracles fitness product or service or supplement, there aren't miracles in the space that just a couple of people know about that are actually effective. And it's just a marketing tactic to say, here's this, all you have to do is pay me, and I can solve all of your problems. So I think that's an issue. The other thing is, who are you getting the information from? Because people love to talk about nutrition and exercise, some of whom really don't have the qualifications to do so. So we need to say, is the person I'm receiving this message from really the right person to deliver that message? Do they really have the knowledge to say something like vibration plate training improves lymphatic drainage? Do they know what lymphatic drainage is? Because and that even extends to a lot of the physicians who are talking about nutrition. I see podcast clips week after week of someone who has a medical degree talking about, a toxic vegetable or a miracle fruit, or the reasons why we need to overhaul this type of diet, or if you're a perimenopausal woman, you need to be on this type of diet. And they don't really have the training, for the most part, to even really speak about nutrition. But because you have a medical degree, you're kind of given a pass to talk about anything health or wellness related. And it gets a little bit dangerous because, frankly, when these people write books, the book publishers know that the exercise and nutrition chapters are always something that people will look for and that will sell. And so I imagine the publishing companies are really trying to get these people to come up with a diet or come up with an exercise program, even if that really isn't in their wheelhouse at all. So I wish that would stop happening, because it really adds to the confusion for the general public.
Yeah, I see this all the time. On my podcast, I've always made sure I've got someone who's an expert in that particular topic. And I've learned so much. I always learn so much from them. And I get very concerned about the physicians who are now selling, especially supplements or selling something. And that I find really worrying for the public, because they're looking at that all this person's a doctor, they're a medical doctor, they've been to whatever university or teaching or whatever, so they must be correct. And they're selling some supplement for $100 a month. It's tricky.
It's also a problem because there are other healthcare professionals who are not very active on social media who are consuming that information. So,
Yeah.
my mom's endocrinologist recommended that she buy a weighted vest, and I was shocked. I was floored. But that's because her endocrinologist is consuming that, nonsense information online. There's no other explanation for it.
No, you're totally right. They're the public as well. And I
Yeah.
have been invited a lot. I think last year 3 times I got invited to scientific conferences to give it, because I am a quite active scientist, research scientist on there, to give a talk about how health professionals and misinformation and social media should all relate. And one of them was actually, should more health professionals be on social media to help um, overcome the misconceptions? And in my talk, I said, well, one of the problems is that there are a growing number of health professionals there, but they are perpetuating the misinformation because they haven't quite understood it. And as you said, they're not experts in nutrition, but they are now saying they're experts. I've seen somebody who you may follow who's now a sex expert. Uh, and so, yeah, every week people are reinventing themselves as something else. And yeah, so it is really worrying. And I find it's just so hard for the public, and as you say, everyone picks up this information. For me, when I give these talks and to the public, I always say trust the societies. So the scientific societies. For example, if you want to look at osteoporosis, go and look at the Osteoporosis Society. What are they recommending? If you're worried about heart disease, go to them. Go to the fertility societies. Some of them, which I've been involved with over the years. The trouble is, on social media, these societies are not very active, and they're not very active
Mm,
because it's quite toxic. You've seen it. I know you've been at the receiving end. I've been at the
yeah.
receiving end. I was at the receiving end of some really, actually, after I gave the last talk, I heard from some of the health professionals in the audience about eating McDonald's fries in the fertility community. The patients have got it in their head that it's a good luck charm and it will help them get pregnant and reduce ovarian hyperstimulation if they eat McDonald's fries the day they have their embryo transfer. So I did a reel about it. Oh my goodness me. The comments I got were just so, I was really upset. People arguing with me that they enjoyed eating McDonald's fries, and how dare I suggest that it's not going to help them.
Yeah.
So for a professional society where all of us that do work on these societies, we do it for free, we do it in our spare time, and we want it to be very evidence-based, we want to be neutral, we don't want to be um, have any conflicts of interest. But it's hard for those same people to go on social media and start reacting because they're not. I mean, I do run a couple of groups, and we try to do things on social media, especially regarding reproductive health education, but we don't have the influence of the influencer who is saying the more controversial things, growing that audience of hundreds of thousands of people, because the public seem to, I don't know, they love the misinformation. It's sexier. It's more outrageous than the actual fact. So that's, I think, the problem that we've got.
I think it's also really hard to compete with the type of content creation that is really attention grabbing and people want to click on, because often, you go to some of these societies and they aren't really presenting the information in a flashy way that really draws people in. And I mean, it seems unfortunate that would have to be something that we worry about, but I think it might be, because traditionally, the way that we are trained in as scientists or as healthcare providers, it's not really about, oh, how can we get a lot of attention? How can we say this in a really provocative way? So that's not, in terms of science communication or health communication, we have always been trained to make sure that you're being really measured and nuanced and evidence based. And that can come across as pretty boring. And so it's hard to compete in a space where people have such short attention spans and they really are going to gravitate towards that type of content that looks and feels exciting.
Well, I think your content does appeal to me, and I love the way you do your diagrams. And I always make sure that you're credited, but I've used them a number of times when I've given talks at scientific meetings. So crystal clear. But yeah, the way content creators make it is off the scale. Lauren, that's been such a brilliant conversation. I hope we've at least made people think a little bit more when they're listening to really grabbing stuff out there on social media. But I'm going to finish. I always finish with a change of subject. So I'm quite obsessed with happiness and joy and making sure people are enjoying their life. So, Lauren, what makes you happy and where is your happy place?
Oh, a very peaceful ocean. So I'd like to, stand on the rocks and look out at the waves and just enjoy the expanse of that. I don't have to be in it, but I like to be next to it and looking out across the waves.
Beautifully put. And yes, when I've asked the women this, I put this up in my book. It's the very last part of my book. Lots of people love the ocean, but as you said, not everyone needs to get in it. And I am one of the crazy people, even at the moment in the UK when it's 1 degree, we're getting in it. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. My very final question: what advice would you give your younger self?
Hmm. Trust that it will all come together, because I had a very non-linear path, and now I look back and think, had I not had that experience or made that decision, then I wouldn't be able to kind of weave together all of those things that I do today. So I think as young people, we can feel a lot of pressure to make major life choices that define our careers or our futures for decades to come. And I was really hesitant to do that. And I kept waiting for this light bulb to go off to, where I would suddenly realize what I was destined to do. And that never happened. But I continued to kind of follow my interests in a way that it was maybe not as traditional as just kind of picking the path and doing all of the things back to back. And I don't regret those decisions, but I did have a lot of anxiety about it at the time as a young person.
But now it's, as you say, I love that when our life experiences have built us into the person that we are. And I always say, whatever you've experienced, it's all been useful.
Absolutely. And we all continue to grow. So I think there's a lot of pressure to look back and think, what if? And I'm definitely guilty of doing that, like everybody. But we wouldn't be able to approach our problems or our decisions the same way at that stage of life, because you don't have all of the wisdom that comes with being on the planet for longer.
I'm certainly there with the wisdom. Lauren, that was it. It was great to talk to you. Please keep up all your fantastic work on social media. I know it's tough, and I know we get trolled and we get negative comments and people arguing, and it's a shame that it's so toxic. But we need people like you. We really do. You're doing terrific work. So please keep it up, and thank you very much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.